Hello everyone, welcome to my Evil Within assignment DLC, Kurayami difficulty, no damage walkthrough, and this is chapter 1, An Oath. So yeah guys, I'm finally doing the DLCs for the Evil Within, after doing my Akumu difficulty walkthrough of the Evil Within, as well as my Akumu difficulty walkthrough for the Evil Within 2. These are long overdue, I don't know why it's taking me so long to get started on these DLCs. But after doing this walkthrough, I will get started on the Consequence DLC, and then I will also get the chance to do the Executioner DLC. So, this is a very interesting piece of content. So, the Evil Within's Kidman DLCs are very story-driven DLCs. They don't really have any real difficulty to them. But this is their idea of difficulty for the Kidman DLCs. So, there are only two difficulty modes for the Kidman DLCs. Survival difficulty and Kurayami difficulty. And I am sure you can recognize exactly what differentiates Kurayami difficulty from Survivor difficulty. And it is that it turns off all the lights. The lighting is completely disabled on this DLC, and the only form of lighting you have is your flashlight, the enemy's aura whenever they detect you, and other ambient light sources that are only present during particular moments. And altogether, it just compounds into one of the most annoying difficulties I have ever played, and I really don't understand what the developers were thinking when they designed this difficulty. Because this difficulty is not hard. It's basically Survivor difficulty, but you just don't have any light sources. Everything else is exactly the same. You're not going to get any kind of challenge with this difficulty whatsoever, and all it does is just make me lament the fact that the developers have no respect for their horror lighting, and they have no respect for the cutscenes, because this difficulty also affects the cutscenes as well, because for some reason they don't bother keeping the lighting for the cutscenes. Everything is just draped in darkness, and then when you have all the moments where you just have these vignettes that showcase an important event happening, it's all draped in darkness. You know, I don't really understand the thought processes involved with developing this difficulty. I don't know who it's for. I don't know who in their right mind would actually think that this difficulty is actually worth playing. But this is just unbelievable. I just cannot believe they would do this. And I just feel like they only did it because they didn't really think of any cool ways of actually making this DLC difficult, and I think because they wanted to focus more on the story aspects, because there are lots of big story aspects involved with the DLCs, they just decided to opt for this difficulty. But there are so many interesting ways they could have made this difficulty interesting while still making the story a big focus. And instead, it just feels like a very jarring experience playing through this difficulty. And I'm just severely disappointed that they opted for these kind of difficulties. I'm glad this kind of difficulty didn't return in Evil Within 2, and instead we got Classic difficulty, which was another failure in difficulty design. Akumu difficulty will always be the best when it comes to difficulty design, for sure, in the Evil Within series, because it definitely showcases a high level of confidence with what they have currently in the game and how they choose to make the difficulty. And it really says a lot when a developer goes out of their way to design a difficulty where you die in one hit, because it shows that they have a lot of confidence in their systems, and they're highly confident that they can make a difficulty that is appealing to anyone, and it doesn't compromise certain aspects of the game. But this difficulty really compromises the gameplay aspect, and it makes enjoying the story of the DLCs like less intriguing, because you're spending more time fighting the game than you are just getting into it. So like I said before, I just don't appreciate this difficulty, and I know for sure that a lot of people would be expecting me to do this difficulty, given that it's the highest difficulty, and if I were to do Survivor difficulty, they would assume I'm just being a scrub player. But I'm telling you guys, this difficulty is no different to Survivor difficulty. All they've done is just turned off the lights. So everything you're going to be seeing me do in this walkthrough is going to be no different to what I would be doing normally on Survivor difficulty. So there's really no compelling argument you can give as to why this difficulty is any different to Survivor difficulty. The only thing that's going to be different is if I choose to just run around in circles for a little bit because I just forget where I'm going. That's really it. But enough of that little rant. Let's just talk about what's happened so far. So you'll notice that the mechanics of the Kidman DLCs are slightly different compared to the main game. Obviously, Kidman doesn't have as many options compared to Sebastian because she doesn't have the ability to fight back. I mean, they have made some minute adjustments to the HUD and to the inventory system. And you're going to be spending more time on this game avoiding the enemies and using your lure mechanic to your advantage. And that's a really cool design choice, the lure mechanic. So whenever you're in cover, and the cover system is a new thing as well, so this is the very first piece of Evil Within content that has utilized a cover system. You have the ability to press square while in cover, and Kitman will yell, and she will attract enemies that hear it. And I quite like that she's able to do that. You don't really see a lot of games utilize a lure mechanic like that, where the character literally shouts out, and anyone who picks up on that is just going to come over to where they are. I'd practically do the same if I was in the same situation as well, and I would just use guerrilla tactics, essentially. But the lore mechanic on the Kitman DLCs is very powerful. It is so good at being able to control where enemies go and just being able to control the flow of the encounters. And you're going to be seeing me utilize the lore mechanic in some very creative ways to either get past enemies or lure them into situations where they can kill themselves. It's so good. And then alongside the lure mechanic, you also have the bottles that return in this DLC. So the bottles are mainly going to be utilized as a distraction mechanic. The whole mechanic of stunning enemies by hitting them in the head with a bottle does return in this DLC, but Kidman doesn't have any kind of weapons aside from the axe, and the axe is a consumable. It's not like the knife where it's a weapon that you're able to carry with you at all times. The moment you use the axe for a stealth kill, and that's the only situation where you'll be able to utilize the axe, you'll lose it, and you'll have to find another one. But we're not going to be introduced to the axes until we get to Chapter 2, because Chapter 1 is incredibly simple. But I do have to give the game credit for providing Kidman with a wide variety of options to allow her to deal with these encounters. It's perfectly logical, and it complements how Kidman was able to get to the end without being so reliant upon invisible forces or lucky passes saving her all the time, much like Outlast. You know, a lot of people would compare this game, or I'm sorry, not this game, the DLCs to Outlast, given how much it emphasizes on not being able to fight back. But, I mean, it doesn't mean that Kidman is just a complete idiot when it comes to handling the enemies. You know, she's still a very clever individual. I mean, she's a Mobius agent, for crying out loud, and even with no kind of weaponry at her disposal, she's able to come up with these very clever ways of dealing with the enemies. And speaking of enemies, we have this encounter right here. There are two Haunted. You might be wondering why this guy on the left is running right now. It's because I had to restart the checkpoint because I messed up on my strategy. But what you need to do is when he's on that side, throw the bottle into that room and then lock the door behind him. And once you lock him in there, he will never have the chance to get out of that room. He's stuck in there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bottle right here and I'm going to use it to lure the other Haunted away. If you don't have a bottle initially, there is a vending machine that you can hit that's inside of this whole entire area, which will give you a bottle. But I lure him away, and now I'm going to use the key card that I picked up to get through this door. And there we go. There are multiple ways you can approach the situation. You could even use the phone in order to lure the guy in that room, but I don't recommend doing it because I think it's just a very tedious process, and I'm not a big fan of the scripting. Although, I mean, it makes sense if Kidman has to actually turn on the device or, I don't know, like get the phone number of that device before she's actually able to call it. But it's just such a tedious process that there's really no point in doing it. But now we're doing some more exploration. This is a new mechanic with being able to use the flashlight to reveal certain areas if you're able to shine it on the Mobius symbol. And this is really interesting, the way they try to portray the story on this DLC. I am really fascinated by the story of the Evil Within series. I've expressed this many times in my walkthroughs. Like, I'm so interested in the story in this DLC, and also in the Evil Within series as a whole, that I've even done collectible videos of the Evil Within series, and this is the only game series where I really feel like the collectibles are interesting because they really help flesh out the story and provide a lot more subtle details as to what's happening. You know, it's just so interesting. The psychological aspects of this game, and then the way they try to use a biological process in order to explain how exactly STEM is able to create everything you're seeing right now. You know, this is really the only psychological based game that has a biological basis for everything happening. You know, in most psychological horror games like Silent Hill, they have to rely so much on the supernatural, you know, like magic and all these kind of things to really bring everything about. But, you know, it gets so repetitive after a while, just seeing the exact same process repeated over and over again. But this game is just so original in how it does its psychological horror, and on top of that, it uses it as a way to make the story so intriguing to explore. And, you know, that's why in The Evil Within 2, they were very direct with really showing the player a lot of these story details. You know, like the dialogue, for instance, in the Evil Within series is very different when you progress through the game series. The Evil Within 1's dialogue and then the dialogue in the DLCs, the dialogue is very subtle and it doesn't really feel like it's clear. It's very vague a lot of the times, and oftentimes that causes the story to be a little bit confusing. But in the Evil Within 2, they're a lot more direct with bringing out the story details, not so vague about everything. Like, they even give you the opportunity to talk with characters to discuss the story elements. And I really like that you can actually talk with certain characters on the Evil Within 2. It gives them a reason to exist within this world, and you're getting to hear their personality, you're getting to hear their thoughts on STEM, and you're starting to understand other characters, other aspects of the world to a better degree. I think it was a really cool design choice. And while it did clear up a few things that I had questions about in the first Evil Within, it didn't really answer all the questions I had about the Evil Within. You know, like, I'm still confused as to why the world manipulation happens, and if Ruvik does have the ability to control the environments within STEM, why is it that he's able to let the characters scrape by so easily? Like, I'm honestly surprised he doesn't, like, cause the floor to go away and then just cause the characters to fall on a bunch of spikes, for instance. I don't know if that's just an oversight, or maybe, you know, the character's force of will is somehow allowing them to shield themselves a little bit from Ruvik's influence over the world, so they themselves have a bit of control over it. And Marcelo Jimenez did state in Chapter 8 that all of us are contributing on some level, but he's the only one with conscious influence. Maybe he neglected to inform Sebastian that, like, Ruvik having the ability to influence the environment does have its limits. Again, I'm not really sure why they didn't really follow up with this. It would have been really cool if they answered that. But that's just the problem when you have a lot of these psychological personality types being the center of all the influence happening in a game. Like, Evelyn from Resident Evil 7, there's just a lot of confusing parts with Evelyn in Resident Evil 7, you know, because Evelyn has a psychological control over the mold, given that she herself is made out of the mold. Why is it that there are certain situations where she doesn't speed up the mutation in individuals that could be threatening to her? You know, like in the case of Alan from Resident Evil 7, when Alan was killed by Evelyn, she sped up his mutation because he called her a bitch. And then with Zoe, when Zoe tried to run away, Evelyn stopped her. But why doesn't she try to speed up Ethan's mutation, for instance, when he was closing in on Evelyn? Is it because she thought Ethan wouldn't be a threat? Is it because she still wanted him to be her dad? You know, it's stuff like that that really doesn't make any sense, because it's all highly dependent upon a very random variable, and that random variable being, what is this person's mentality at the time, and what are they so focused on? Are they distracted by something? And is that why this main character or these other characters are able to scrape by so easily? You know, that's something I question with Ruvik as well, with the kind of choices he makes when it comes to either speeding up or impeding a character's progress throughout the game. That they didn't really go into a lot of detail about that. I assume that's just something you're not supposed to think about, but I think it's my obligation to think about those kind of things. But who knows? But anyway, we have the cadavers right here. So the cadavers are blind, as Kidman describes, and they also respond to noises, so you need to exert a bit of caution with this enemy, and when this enemy detects you, it does a grab, and it will instantly kill you because it explodes. They're essentially suicide bombers. But this section is so easy. Just get over here and kill this cadaver using the dumpster, and then you're going to have to backtrack through this room over here so that you can get past these two cadavers and get over to the other side. And then once you get over to the ladder that's on the other side of the dumpster, this will be the end of the sequence. But one cool thing to note about the cadavers is that they can actually kill Haunted, not just by exploding near them, but they can actually grab Haunted because they're blind, so they don't know what they're attacking. And I'm going to be able to utilize that to my advantage in Chapter 2, and it allows me to do a very consistent strategy for one encounter in Chapter 2. What a cool design choice. Friendly fire for the enemies is something that not a lot of developers do nowadays, and it really needs to be encouraged. But now that we've successfully reconstructed Kidman's profile, we need to get out of here. And there's one enemy who will come out of the elevator that you used to get down here, but you are able to get behind him and just get into the elevator, and the moment you get into the elevator, it just closes. But one big problem that I have with this DLC and the Consequence DLC is whenever Kidman runs into an enemy, she gets knocked back for some reason. So you need to be very careful of that when you're trying to run past this guy. Just wait for him to finish his animation and then get behind him. That way he's giving you more room to get past him. And it's going to happen right here. So I'm just going to hit the button, and I'm just going to wait until he jumps out of the elevator, and that is the end of this section. I don't even sprint, I just jog, because I didn't want to run the gamut with that stupid knockback animation. But there's only one encounter left, and it's with Shade. And let's just say I think I'm in love with Shade. Shade looks so beautiful in this game. It's kind of hard to be afraid of her when she's as suggestive as she is. And she's basically the manifestation of Ruvik's desire to find a body, which is why she constantly says, "your body," whenever she kills someone. I think the developers tried to essentially poke fun at a lot of male gamers, because they put a lot of emphasis onto the body parts that most males would probably look at whenever they're trying to find a mate. It's so silly. I mean, that's just the thing, though. You know, a lot of Japanese games tend to have a lot of suggestive elements with some of their characters. And the Evil Within series as a whole doesn't really embrace a lot of suggestive elements. But for some reason they made an exception with this DLC. And I just find it hard for me not to feel in love with Shade. She's just so sexy hot. I don't know. You know, I mean, it's just the thing I find myself embracing a lot, you know. I find a lot of monsters to be very attractive overall when I look at a lot of these games. But anyway, let's just get on with this encounter right here. So this is a survival moment, and I'm almost certain you can influence Shade's pathing based on where you are, because Shade seems to take the exact same path whenever I'm in this area. And she's going on this side right now, so I need to run to the left, but I don't move away fast enough because I thought she'd just stop or something, but I was wrong. And whenever she spots you with her light, it slows you down, so you have to get out of her line of sight if you want to sprint away. And the last known position mechanic can be good, but there are times where Shade will still kind of know where you are. She displays this kind of omniscience a lot whenever I'm doing the encounter with her in Chapter 3. Oh, I love this as well. So, Shade will sometimes bend her legs in such a sexy posture whenever she's trying to search these corridors. I suppose another element to that is that she's possibly trying to assume such poses in order to essentially lure unsuspecting males to her so that she can actually devour them. And I just think it's a very interesting tactic that she employs. I mean, I suppose it makes sense why Shade appears the way she does, because Ruvik does display a bit of an incestuous relationship with Laura, as Jimenez describes in one of his audio logs. I almost wonder if that's one of the main reasons why Laura is often depicted as not wearing any clothes, because of Ruvik's almost incestuous relationship with his sister. And I wonder if that applies to Shade as well, and why she appears the way she does in the DLCs. I mean, that's one possible explanation you can give, but I suppose being the manifestation of Ruvik's desire to find a body, the whole phrasing of desire to find a body could come across as a bit of an innuendo. So they might be trying to capitalize on that by giving Shade the kind of appearance she has. But I think I'm going to stop right there, because I think I'm straying a little too far away from what's happening right now. Give given that this is the end of this video, but that's just what I assume the mentalities of the developers were at the time. But anyway, this has been Chapter 1 of the Assignment DLC. Stay tuned for Chapter 2. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.